Ron Castile now the most prominent Republican in the city of Philadelphia, and do you think that he's right now the front runner for that Republican nomination for mayor in 2 years?
The answer to your first question, Mark, is that with the possible exceptions of my parents, he's the most prominent Republican in Philadelphia. As to whether he'll be a candidate for mayor, only he can answer that question. My sense of it is, knowing Ron as I do, he's been a prosecutor for 18 years. He loves his job. I have strong doubts as to whether he'll be willing to leave his job to run for mayor.
Ed, did you see any basic change in the political horizon in Philadelphia this time around?
No, not really. It was surprising. As Jim said in his opening statement, I think the election was sort of a split decision. I think the Republicans tried, in part, more Joe Rox than the Castile campaign, tried in part to make the good administration the issue, and that may have worked to a small degree in certain sections of the city, but it certainly wasn't a strategy that was enormously successful, for the simple reason that voters have become more and more sophisticated. They know they're voting for district attorney, and they liked what Ron Castile had done, and for controller. And I think the reason Jonathan Seidel won is I thought his campaign did something extremely effectively. They preached in their television ads, in their mail, they preached that they had the qualified candidate, someone who was an accountant, somebody who was a lawyer, running against a politician who was trying to run on some larger and broader issues. People want a good controller, and they want a good district attorney, and I think they made a selection on what they believe were the better qualified candidates.
You buy that?
I think that Ed's analysis is 95% accurate. I think that the failure of the Rox campaign was that Joe failed to define Jonathan Seidel. Joe raised enough money to have enough television advertising so that he could have shaped the message as to Seidel. And while it's true that Jonathan is a lawyer in his TPA, there were some negatives about Jonathan which really did not get out there. I think that Joe took a cautious approach to the campaign, and perhaps too cautious.
Why would he have done that? Why would he have made that mistake?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that Joe may have been concerned about the '87 mayoralty campaign when he made one statement that was of concern in that race. I do think it's important to note that Joe Rox handled himself in this campaign tremendously well. He didn't make one mistake. He didn't say one thing inappropriate. He carried himself extremely well throughout the city of Philadelphia. I think he has a good chance to go back to the Senate next year, and he's got a bright future in politics. But I think he may have been a little overcautious in his approach to this campaign.
Well, let's look at the Max/Bess Wiener factor. Did the Wiener place on the ballot cost Joe Rox the election, or, I mean, who did the Wiener factor hurt and help? We've heard viable arguments on both sides.
Well, one of the smartest Democrats around is Vince Fumo, and he believes it absolutely helped Jonathan Seidel and hurt Joe Rox. I've looked at the returns, and I think it was sort of a wash, Jim. I think there were certain areas where her presence on the ballot hurt Joe Rox. There were certain areas where her presence on the ballot hurt John Seidel. So I think it was a little bit of a wash. I don't think it was a decisive factor in the election. I don't think we can ever know for sure. But Jonathan Seidel won that election flat out.
I was just going to ask, politically speaking, Seidel deserved to win. He didn't win because the name Wiener was on the ballot.
Well, if you want to talk about the ballot itself, there are two other factors which are very important in assessing why each candidate got as many votes as they did. The first is the position of the relative candidates on the ballot. Controller is last and DA is next to last. And a lot of Democrats will go in there and pull the straight Democratic lever, not seeing the candidate who they really wanted to go in there and vote for, be it Ron Castile or Joe Rox, right off the bat. And the second thing, of course, is the presence of the Democratic lever on the ballot. If we were not...
No, that would be true, except that Castile won by 12 points.
Well, Ron won by 12 points despite the existence of the lever, Mark, or Jim. If we didn't have a lever in Pennsylvania, I think that Joe Rox would have won and Ron would have won by upwards of 20 points.
That kind of presumes a good deal of stupidity on the part of the voters, doesn't it?
Which I think is disappearing, Mark. I think Shanin's point is that the effect of the lever still helps the Democratic Party, but not very much. Not very much. You see it election after election after election. I think people are getting very sophisticated. If you look in wards that are predominantly black, Bess Wiener got votes. There's no question she got votes. And those votes would have traditionally been assumed to go to John Seidel, which is why I say it's a wash. One thing that I think is encouraging, I mean, I think there's some trends in politics that are horribly discouraging, but I think one thing that is encouraging is I think that although Shanin's general theory about the lever helping Democrats is still correct, it is encouraging that voters are voting so independently, so much more independently than ever before.
I was just going to say, Ron Castile was a favorite to win the election, obviously. Walter Phillips didn't have a dime to spend on television.
Yeah.
It's almost unthinkable that you can run for district attorney in Philadelphia and
A major office.
and have no television advertising. But isn't it still a big story when a Republican wins a citywide election in Philadelphia, given the overwhelming registration advantage of the Democratic Party? Almost discounting everything else. Isn't that still a big story?
I don't think so. I don't think it's still a big story, but it's not nearly as big as it was when Shanin Specter won back in 65 and again in 69. And the reason for that is I don't think registration means anything. We still enjoy a significant registration edge in the Northeast, and yet look at your state representative races. They're basically all Republican state representatives from the Northeast, and the state senator is Hank Salvatore. So I don't think it's as much of a story as it was in Shanin Specter's days. That's number one. Number two, the power of the incumbency, and no one knows that better than I do, is enormous, is absolutely enormous. You are able to be on television in a job like district attorney literally at your choosing. You can be on your television 5 days a week or 3 days a week or 7 days a week, basically at your choosing. In addition, the power of the incumbency gives you the aura of being a potential candidate for something else. I share Shanin's belief that Ron is a lifetime prosecutor and probably doesn't want to run for mayor. I'm not sure that he'll be able to hold that in light of what from some Republican quarters may be tremendous pressure. But the incumbency is enormously powerful. Ron raised close to $1 million, far more than it was ever raised. When I ran for re-election in 81, I raised about $270,000, and I wound up getting 80% of the vote. But that came from the power of the incumbency and the power of TV ads. Literally, people...
And you were also a Democrat.
Yeah, literally, people went to the polls, though, Jim, thinking that Walter Phillips was a disgrace, that an independent report had found him to be a disgrace as special prosecutor, that he was against the death penalty for felony murder, and that he was for decriminalization of marijuana, all of which, in my judgment, is clearly untrue, but we don't have to get into that necessarily. They ran a brilliant campaign, and Shanin was responsible for that. But when he had no money to answer, and you had a popular incumbent with that type of TV campaign doing that type of extremely negative campaigning.
Is it a surprise that Ron Castile only won by 12?
To me, I expected when we couldn't answer on TV, I expected the loss to approach dimensions that a friend of mine, Mary Collins, was running for a judge as a Democrat only. She wasn't one of the cross-endorsed people, and I thought she was in serious danger because I thought Ron was going to win by so much that would affect her race. She wound up winning by 50,000 votes. So, and that's not to take anything away from Ron. Ron is extremely popular. You know, I, like all politicians, have seen the polls. The public has a very fine perception of him, and he is a decent and honest guy.
But he couldn't bring Joe Rox into victory.
No?
Shanin, maybe you can answer a question that puzzled me all through this campaign. People gave money to the Ron Castile campaign in amounts that we see given to a mayoral race. Not even, well, maybe a Senate race, I don't know, but certainly a race where the winner can get people jobs, can do people favors. I mean, this is the kind of money that is raised in big races, and a DA can't do anything. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he hires a couple hundred lawyers, and generally they have to pass the test anyway. So why did they give so much money to him?
Well, I'm not sure that he raised quite as much as your analysis might suggest.
Over 900.
Well, we topped $1 million on Election Day. But in the 87 mayoral race, both Mayor Good and Frank Rizzo raised $3 million. And while it's true that we raised $1 million, that's only a third of $3 million. I think that Ron was able to raise that kind of money because he is, as Ed says, an immensely popular person. And also because I believe some people gave money to Ron because it was their way of expressing themselves as to their concerns about the good administration. It's difficult to speak your piece currently as to how disgusted you are with city government. People see Ron Castile as the sole voice of reason in Philadelphia, and by giving him money, they were able to express themselves.
But I don't want to argue with you. We're not here to do that, but maybe you will, Ed. It just seems to me that one doesn't write a check for $10,000 to a guy who's going to be DA.
Well, look, the bottom line is, I disagree with Shanin, although I think part of it giving money. There were people who gave me money when I was an incumbent. People would send me a check, literally unsolicited, saying, I thought you'd done a great job the first 4 years.
But how big was
How
the
much
check?
was that check
Right.
for?
Yeah,
$100 bucks?
Sometimes $500 or $1,000.
But they expect something in return for that, don't they?
There's no. I think there's an element of Ron's performance that generate a lot of that money, but there's no question. His major fundraisers went around preaching the gospel. This is our guy for mayor, or it's
Not
not
true.
mayor, governor. Oh,
Not true.
I can name names.
Name them. Let's go.
Well, Charlie Kopp for one.
Not true.
Well, it is true. And Charlie Kopp has told a number of people that this is our guy for mayor.
And by the way, he could have said that without Ron's approval. That's,
Oh, of course. I don't think Ron gave his okay on that. No, I agree. Listen, people raise money for candidates and say a lot of things.
Does it prove something that a candidate running for district attorney has the ability to raise $1 million? Doesn't that in and of itself make him a viable mayoral candidate?
Yes.
oh, sure.
Yeah.
No, no question.
So would it be far-fetched for me to think that there was an effort to raise that kind of money to prove to everybody that he could raise that kind of money?
Jim, the effort was made to try to win this race.
Did you need $1 million to win the race?
Yes.
Knowing that your opponent couldn't raise any money for television?
Well, you don't know that in advance. You don't know how much money Wally Phillips was going to be able to raise, or whether he'd write a personal check for the balance, and he had the ability to do so if he so chose.
Why didn't he do that?
That's something you have to ask Wally about. But Wally did raise $470,000, which was more than Castile raised in '85 when Ron was successful in his race for DA the first time around.
That number's right? Excuse me.
That discounts the money he spent in the primary. He spent about 190 of that in the primary, so really he wound up raising about $270,000.
And he couldn't eke any TV commercials out of that? That's
No.
strange.
There are basic things you have to do to run a campaign. I saw a figure, I don't know if it's right, and Shanin would certainly know, that the Castile campaign put $500,000 of their $1 million on TV, which meant that they spent $500,000 on other things.
Well, we spent $395 on television, but it costs a lot of money to raise money. It costs about 15 cents for every dollar that you raise, so it costs about $150 to raise
Yeah,
a
so
million.
think of that, though, Mark. Over $600,000 didn't go on TV in their campaign, so you can see why Wally couldn't get on.
Let me interrupt. We have to take a break, and we'll be back with more of this conversation in just a moment.
The right way to buy carpet is in your own home. That's why Spectrum Carpet introduces our new Shop at Home carpet service. Just pick up your phone and call, and we'll bring a huge selection of carpet to your home. Plus, call today and you don't pay. That's right. Buy your carpet now and make no payment for 6 months and get free pad and installation. It's Spectrum Carpet's new Shop at Home carpet service. When you call now, you'll make no payment for 6 months and get free pad and installation. So call for carpet now.
Introducing Midway Airlines nonstop service to Florida. Seven Florida cities for only $99. Midway Airlines to Florida. All seats, all flights, only $99.
We're back. Even the breaks here tend to be a little rambunctious. We're back on the program talking to Shanin Specter and Ed Rendell. We have about 10 minutes left, 10 and a half minutes left. Let's talk some specifics. Before we find out what Shanin Specter's political future is, or Ed Rendell's political future is, let's talk about the mayoral election. Ed Rendell, give me the two candidates.
Gee, there's no way to tell them right now, Jim. They're just simply isn't. You can't predict an election 2 years from now. I would say the favorites. Now,
I knew we'd get an answer out
the
of it.
favorites. Well, have I ever not answered a question? The favorites would be, and some people might find this to be frightening, but the favorites would be Lucian Blackwell and Frank Rizzo. They're the early favorites because I think they control the flow of what occurs.
Shanin?
I would say the favorites would be Lucian Blackwell and Ron Castile if we can convince Ron to run.
And you're going to try?
Probably.
Okay. What about the theory that Tom Folietta's district is going to be reapportioned out of existence, and in an agreement with Bill Gray will support Tom Folietta for mayor, and he will be the mayoral candidate, not Lucian Blackwell? I know this isn't the first time you've heard that.
I wish that I had a lot of money to bet against that theory, because I would bet 10-1 against it. I mean, it's pure fantasy. Nobody knows who's going to be reapportioned in and reapportioned out. My guess is Tom Folietta's district will be reshaped in a way that probably is more favorable for him. And number one. Number two, there's nothing politically that would motivate, be on the plus side for Bill Gray to do that. And I think Tom Folietta's found a niche in Congress, and he's not going to give it up without a fight. So I think that's just ludicrous.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, don't count Tom Folietta out. He had a problem, me too. People thought he couldn't win at a primary with Joe Smith, and he did.
Yeah.
So he's got a lot of force.
If you can't convince Ron Castile to run for mayor, do you think Frank Rizzo is the likely candidate?
I think it's wide open at that point. I think Mayor Rizzo would be one candidate, many others as well.
Some people say your mother would like to run for that job. Do you think she would?
You have to ask her that.
What do you say? I don't know what you think, not
no,
what you think.
I don't get in the business of talking about my parents' aspirations or plans. That's a mistake I made a long time ago, 1970, with Andrea Mitchell, and I'm not going to repeat that mistake.
What did you say to her?
I told her on the occasion of my father swearing in for a second term as CA when I was all of 13 that my father might run for governor that year. And I have not forgotten the lesson that I got thereafter.
You're still grounded.
Well,
basically, yes. On that topic I am, yeah.
If your mother were interested in running for mayor, would you encourage her or discourage her?
Same category. Same category of question.
Okay. Ed, one for you. It's been said that Lucian Blackwell is going to run for mayor. Clearly, he is.
No question about that.
Okay. And that Congressman Gray doesn't support him and won't support him, and that presently he's supporting Councilman George Burrell. And a lot of people say that if two black candidates for mayor run, there will be a wide opening in the middle somewhere for someone like yourself to run and try to be the winner in the middle. Might you?
Sure, I might, Mark. No question about it. I have always been concerned about what goes on here. I am very saddened by some of the things that have occurred in Philadelphia, and I think we can make changes. If the opportunities are there, I'd have to strongly consider it. I want to help Philadelphia in any way that I can, and if the best vehicle to do that is to run, if I thought I had a chance, I probably would run.
Two black candidates against you would be the best scenario for you, do you think?
Obviously, that would be demographically a good scenario, but I think that you're going to find in this election that it's much more wide open in terms of blacks voting for whites and whites voting for blacks than before.
Okay, but right now we do have Burrell raising money and Blackwell raising money. They're running.
Right.
Clearly. If nothing else happens.
Not clearly. They're running now.
Well, all right.
There's
But if
a
nothing,
big difference, Mark, between running now and running really when the election occurs.
but if nothing changes dramatically, do you see yourself getting into that mix? If nothing changes today, move the clock ahead a year.
All I can say is that I might. It's obviously something I'd consider, and obviously something I'd talk to my family about and talk to other political leaders about.
You talk to him about it? You're looking at Shane?
Talk to Shane about it?
If I can
Shanin's
help
got
him
good
out,
instinct.
if I can help him out for just a moment, Ed's only weakness currently in the political landscape is he's in the wrong party, and we've got to bring Ed into our party. He ought to seriously consider it. We need people like Ed Rendell in our party.
Does Ed Rendell have another weakness, and that is that he has lost a number of elections since his last victory?
Absolutely not.
That's not a weakness?
You're talking to the right
not.
person for that.
Let me tell you something about that. Between Bob Casey and Shanin Specter, who are respectively governor and senator, they have 7 losses. And nobody really cares very much about those losses after you win one. I think that Ed Rendell is a tremendously viable politician in Philadelphia today. I think he can be mayor. I think he can be governor. There's no limit on Ed Rendell's political future.
You said before that you would never leave the Democratic Party. You still stand by that?
Well, before I get into that, I want to say that Shanon's right, not just about me, but Jim Florio is another good example. He has lost twice for governor before being elected. And I find that not only in public opinion
Yeah,
polls...
I know, but he wasn't reduced to the indignity of having to go into the private practice of law. I mean,
Well,
he was still a sitting public official.
Some people think they'd rather be a lawyer than a congressman, but that's another story.
Casey and Specter were there.
Sure, but look, the bottom line is that I think that the apprehension that people have over candidates who've served in office and then lost, I think actually it grows. I think I get a better response now in the streets and from groups than I did when I was running, and I think that's a common phenomenon. So I don't think that's a factor. That wouldn't scare me a bit. You know, the one good thing about losing, and there's very little good about it, but the one thing great about losing is it makes you unafraid to lose again. When I was undefeated and I was the fair-haired boy running in the primary against Casey, I used to lie in bed at night and absolutely dread with real fear what would happen to my life if I lost. It would end. It would be this. And I found that you're still respected, you're still listened to, life goes on in or out of office. And so the next time, if there is a next time, I think I'm going to run the way I want to run, say the things I want to run.
Are you suggesting that the last time or the last number of times you ran, you were not in control of your own campaign?
I think all of us tend to be a little bit, all of the candidates tend to be a little bit in control of advisors and more, I'm not talking about an advisor like Shanin who lives politics and knows politics, but in terms of consultants. And I think all of us, myself included, at times have been dissuaded by consultants to do things that really aren't their gut. I wanted to do a lot of things differently in my campaigns, but in the last analysis, I made the decision not to do them. And nobody can force you not to do them. But I think the next time that I run, if I do run, I'm going to do things my way.
I need my headline, though. Is there any circumstance under which you would consider running as a Republican in a foreseeable future?
Are there any
Because you said before that you would, no way you could ever leave the Democratic Party.
Well, I think I am a Democrat, and I think that the next time I run, it'll be as a Democrat. Are there circumstances that would find me on the Republican line for whatever office? That's possible, and before you laugh at that, you recall Joe Smith ran for Congress as a Democrat on the Republican line.
Shanin Specter ran
and
for
a very
DA.
famous Republican, Shanin Specter, ran for district attorney as a Democrat on the Republican line.
You could do that.
I'd consider that.
Would you all consider that?
Well, speaking for myself, I would not want to see that. I think that if Ed wants to be part of our party, he has to make at least some minor sacrifices. And I would want to see him do that first.
Has there been any conversation between
Yes, today.
you guys?
Today, right here on your show as we speak.
What's next for Shanin Specter?
I've got an active law practice, which needs some work at the current time, and that's my occupation.
Ed, what's next for Shanin Specter?
Again, I don't want to turn this into a mutual admiration society, but it is now hot talk in Democratic circles that Shanin is a hot property for the Republicans. Maybe that involves a congressional bid. Maybe 4 years from now, a bid for controller or something else, or district attorney if Ron has resigned to run for mayor, successful or unsuccessful. I don't think there's any question about it. Not only does Shanin have all of the advantages and some of the disadvantages that come from a famous family, but he in his own right in this campaign has impressed an awful lot of people. He impressed us. The Castile campaign, make no bones about it, was modern-day vintage, almost perfect campaign. Now, I can tell you that a lot of what the modern-day vintage perfect campaign is almost disgusts me. And I don't mean what they did as opposed to what other campaigns. You know, there's so much negativism in it. Here we had two guys who I know well, both of whom worked with me or for me, Ron Castile and Wally Phillips, who by the end of the campaign, terrifically decent men, who by the end of the campaign, a lot of voters and the newspapers and the media said were just swallowed up by saying nasty things about each other.
As far as we know, he's in fine health. Governor Casey has had some cardiovascular problems that required surgery, and we don't know that for a fact he's running for a second term. If in fact there should be a decision that he does not run for a second term, might that change your mind about running for mayor of Philadelphia?
You know, Jim, we could talk about all sorts of different contingencies. I was with Bob Casey tonight. He's lost 20 pounds, looks terrific. He's gonna.
But there's some talk that his wife is trying to extract a promise from him that he wouldn't run for re-election. I don't know that that's true.
You know, I will take, if this is allowed in the ethics of TV journalism, but I will take you and your wife, Mark and his wife, Shanin and his wife, to the most expensive restaurant that you guys want to go to 7 nights in a row if Bob Casey isn't a Democratic candidate for governor.
Pretty good deal.
I think that's a pretty definitive.
Is Barbara Hafer going to be your
stated your
candidate?
opinion.
Is Barbara Hafer going to be your candidate?
I think so.
Yeah?
Almost certainly.
Now you have a pro-choice Republican and a anti-abortion Democrat. It's going to be a fascinating contest if abortion becomes a major issue, and I have no doubts that it will.
Well, that was the same lineup you had in '86. Scranton was pro-choice.
But the issue wasn't on the front burner then, was it?
That's true.
It's not nearly
That's true.
as
I
volatile an issue.
I hope for Barbara Hafer's sake that it's not on the front burner next year.
Why?
Because I think that you run the risk of being identified as being a one-issue candidate, and you can't be elected governor on a one issue like that.
Okay, we're out of time. Shanin Specter, Red Rendell, thanks for stopping by. Always a pleasure. Our thanks to Mark Howard for Action News Issues and Answers. I'm Jim Gardner. We'll see you next week at this time.
From Channel 6, the Delaware Valley's leading news station, this has been Action News, Issues and Answers.